As long as humans have existed, there's been stories of ghosts, hauntings, and the paranormal. And if you're someone that believes in ghosts, you think they have something to do with the afterlife. But what if there are other explanations? What if human thoughts, feelings, experiences, or even consciousness itself could get trapped in a specific location, and that's what's manifesting as a ghost sighting? We explore this topic and more with today's guest. He's a paranormal investigator and author with over 30 books. He's been featured on numerous television shows and is the founder of the Boulder Paranormal Research Society. His latest book is called Dark Spirits. Here's my conversation with Richard Estep.
Okay, let's go.
You're a paranormal investigator.
Yeah.
How did you begin your interest in writing this topic of books?
Well, Michael, I grew up in a haunted house in the UK. When I was a child of the 70s, it was haunted by the spirit of an old lady that it turns out was a former resident of that house. And my aunts and uncles all remembered this old lady coming in at night to tuck them into bed and make sure the kids were all asleep. No idea on their part that she was, in fact, not a flesh and blood person. It was only when they started describing her to my grandparents that they realized who this was, and she had died downstairs in the house some years previously, and was just keeping, I think, a maternal eye on the children in the family. And I grew up in that house. I slept in that same bedroom. I heard those stories, was scared half to death, but also kind of excited, because what kid doesn't love a good ghost story, especially when it involves the room that you're in. Never met her, which is probably a good thing, because I like to think she concluded her business and moved on. But the story stuck with me, and I continue to be fascinated by stories of ghosts and hauntings to this day.
And going in with that, I mean, you also were a tour guide over at the Stanley Hotel, right? The famous Stanley Hotel in Boulder.
Famous and infamous. It's not in Boulder. It's in Estes Park, Colorado, up in the mountains. Just as Stephen King describes it in The Shining. I gave ghost tours there for 3 years and historical tours. Fell in love with the place. It absolutely does deserve its haunted reputation. But unlike Mr. King loves to. He scares his readers. That's what his books are for. It's really a very pleasant kind of place to go. There's none of that darkness or real negativity that we could find at the Stanley.
But what kind of things? I mean, did you experience anything there? Have any firsthand accounts? And tell us some of those. Like give us for example.
Yeah, like when you go behind the scenes of a location like that, usually something will happen when you're least expecting it. So one night I was leading a group of customers through the concert hall, which is a separate building to the Stanley itself. It's just a little further down the hill. And we went into the concert hall. It was still daylight, like as you see it is here now, about this time of day, in fact, during the summer. And we were in the concert hall. I closed and locked the door behind me and heard a very loud thump, 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 thump coming from the floor in front of the stage. Was one of those original, hardwood floors. And it was the tread of like heavy footsteps coming across the floor. And 20 people plus me all heard it. We all looked. There was nobody there, not a soul, to account for it. So just in case there was somebody downstairs in the basement pranking us, I took a couple of tourists, customers with me. We went downstairs to the basement, and nobody down there in the basement either. The entire building was deserted apart from us. So that kind of thing happens all the time at the hotel, usually when you least expect it.
You know what? And it seems like it's always some sort of a structure, that seems to be haunted. I don't know if you've ever heard of like the Comedy Store in Los Angeles. Did you ever take a visit there? It's one of the most haunted places in the country as well.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I'm not surprised, because I think we tend to associate hauntings with tragedy and woe and negativity, but the Stanley is a happy place. I mean, it opened in 1909. So, over the more than 100 years that it's been open, countless weddings, countless vacations, summer holidays, all those happen there. A lot of joy. And yeah, you get dark hauntings. In fact, that's what this book is partly about. But I would say you equally, on the flip side of that, you see hauntings in places where there was a lot of joy and laughter and positive emotion, which probably tracks with the Comedy Store, people having a good time.
Well, unfortunately, the history behind it is that it used to be owned by the mob back in the
Mhm.
20s, and they tortured and killed a lot of people there. And one of the most famous, well, they made a TV show was out a few years ago about the comic that committed suicide on the and there back in the 80s and haunts the place now. So it's got a
Yeah,
lot of dark side to it, but it
it
creates
does.
that eerie feeling. But no, but the reason why I said that, because it's interesting that you said that there's some of these places that, there's joy and sadness, because, just from doing, research and talking to people in this field, and also just the stories you hear, it always seems to be some sort of trauma, some sort of tragedy that, creates has a place become haunted, let's say. So, but you're saying it's not only just that. So you've actually encountered a good ghost, a
Yeah,
positive feeling.
many.
Really?
I'm going
Really?
to say, so that's one side of the coin. I think the key thing is wherever you find strong emotion, you can often find a haunting, positive or negative. But the thing is, darkness sells, right? I mean, we would be foolish to deny it. Nobody would watch a TV show in which, three investigators in tight t-shirts wandered around a very brightly lit building looking for the sweet old lady that loved the place and is, rumored once in a while to come back and smell of lilacs. Nobody's going to watch that show. People are unfortunately drawn to the darker side of things. That's human nature. So, and I'm actually fine with that as long as we also acknowledge that there is a positive style of haunting. I began investigating in the mid 1990s in my native England, and so many of the cases I investigated were ordinary residences where the haunting seemed to be, let's say you had a couple of senior citizens that loved their home a great deal. They lived there for 40 years, raised a family, had kids, had grandkids, passed away there. And sometimes they would come back, they would be seen, they would be heard, their presence would be felt. There'd be a lingering smell of cigar smoke or flowers or something like that was gone. There are a lot of hauntings like that. They just don't get column inches because, I hate to say it, they're just not marketable. People don't as much want to hear that as they want to be scared.
You're right. People, I mean, it's human nature. It's like we slow down to see the car crash.
Yeah.
We want to see that. We're drawn to that, to the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I like that you brought up that it has to do with emotion. You said anywhere there's strong emotion.
Mm.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think that is? Do you think that this is tied to human consciousness in any sort of way? Meaning that the human consciousness and your experiences somehow get sewn into a certain area, whatever it may be. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm laughing because a book idea literally just sprang into my mind, and I'm going to blame you for this. But having written 40 something books, the inspiration for them strikes at the strangest times. You've made me just want to sit down and plot a book called The World's Nicest Hauntings, just to see how well it does. So,
Well,
note to me, like I'm going to do that, and let's talk about that when it gets written and comes out. But
I love it. If
The
it sells
World's
one
Nicest
copy,
Haunting, yeah,
if it sells one copy, we know why. It's too nice. So you might want
I
to include
kind of
one happy murder,
I kind
one
of want to do it now, man.
one
I kind
revenge
of
murder.
I kind of want to do it. Like, and from sparks like this, sometimes entire fun projects arise. Anyway, so you were talking about consciousness, and I
Yeah.
apologize. My brain was lagging behind, but I think that, well, firstly, not all hauntings are intelligent, right? You get those residual recording type hauntings where there's no intelligence associated with them at all. So I think we have to split between the two. Then we come into the question of, are we talking about a survival of consciousness? Are we talking about a return visit? Are we talking about a fragmentation? Does the consciousness kind of splinter, shatter? Does a shard remain behind while the rest of the consciousness moves on? And I don't think that's a question that anybody has been able to solve satisfactorily yet. Not least
Well,
because we can't define consciousness yet.
but one of the things that you do notice is that these things always seem to be confined to like a space. You always wonder why that is. It's very rare that you hear of the spirit that's haunting that's just roaming down the street. It's more you always hear it's in some sort of
Mm-hmm.
structure. So it makes you think. Why is that? Does material hold some sort of property that makes a being stay? Because, I like to look at this not just from a lot of people look at this, hear ghost stories and think, oh, well, this has to do with some, religion or
Hmm.
spirituality. I start to look at it more from a position of, maybe this is just how consciousness works. It's an electromagnetic field. We're surrounded by electromagnetic fields, and the properties around you, if with a strong emotion, we don't know where that's held in our body, can get stained there. So it's interesting to hear from you, your perspective, and what you've noticed of these things. I mean, a commonality between all these different locations that you've seen where there's a strong
Hmm.
haunting there, and the structures, the environment. Is there anything that jumps out to you that you go, hey, that does ring true through all of these?
There's no common denominator for all of them, but again, I keep coming back to emotion, Michael. Places that people were very happy in or very traumatized in seem to be the two, which is, no surprise that there are so many haunted hospitals, haunted asylums, places of that nature. But I've also researched quite a few haunted firehouses. And having been a firefighter for 15 years, people think, oh, of course, firefighters are around death and destruction. I'm like, that's not it. A firehouse is the happiest place in the world. It is a family away from a family. It really is a second family. So you get a lot of joy there, a lot of camaraderie, a lot of practical jokes, a lot of humor, a lot of love. So, those kind of hauntings, I think, are contained within that structure. But you look at the amount of drama that a hospital or a firehouse or a prison or something of that nature sees over its operational lifetime. There's a lot of energy there, psychic energy there, which I think not all of it necessarily dissipates, whether you want to call it a psychic scar or a rut or a remnant, whatever we want to term it. Some kind of residue seems to remain with that structure that can then be perceived at a later time and date under the right circumstances by the right individuals.
And now, what about as far as a poltergeist is? I mean, this is all in the same realm. Do you see that anytime there's a strong electricity in around the area, that maybe it's there? Because I know poltergeists, you see, they appear in electronic devices. One person I just got to talk to, I did an interview with Stan Gordon. He did say that the one commonality that he found for orbs and things of that nature and the cryptids was that it's always around strong electronics. It's always about a big power source, wherever it may be, and that's where people have these sightings. And then, believe it or not, I was at another comedy club. This time it's the Laugh Factory in Covina, but this was a very, very old building, and it happened to
Right.
be in the same night. But we had on videotape caught an orb, going into an actual dryer, and so you could tell it was seeking out the electricity and came back out and pushed out a big flash of light. So I wanted to know if that's something that you also notice, with these hauntings. Is it somehow, do people talk about electronics and those things being affected? Is electronics
Well,
involved?
well, first of all, I want to throw out the words always and never. I don't think they
Hmm.
belong in the paranormal lexicon.
Right.
I do think it's helpful for a haunting, though, to have some kind of energy source. So high voltage wires, lines. Part of an investigation, as you know, involves baselining, where you go around the building and you figure out where the utilities come in, where the high voltage points are. Fluorescent lights radiate electromagnetic energy. Refrigerators, any devices will do that too. And so you have to look at all that non-glamorous but still pretty important side of things when it comes down to determining, what's going on in a property. But it's not fair to say that there is always a high voltage source or an electrical power source present at all. I mean, if that were the case, why is the battlefield at Gettysburg haunted? Why do you have haunted battlefields at all when there are no power lines there whatsoever? Empty fields, and yet people regularly to this day hear the sounds of cannon fire, screaming, musketry, horses, bugle calls, things like that. So I think it's more complex than that. When it comes to
Yeah.
poltergeists, I think we are guilty as paranormal researchers and enthusiasts. We are guilty of defaulting to the explanation that they're spirits or dead people or whatever. It may be more complicated. Poltergeists may be some kind of non-corporeal intelligence, that they may be extra dimensional. They may arise from a portion of the focus's mind. The individual who's the focus of the poltergeist case may be part of their subconscious. I'm always wary. I know I said don't use the word always, but I'm always wary of any case where we just default to ghosts equals dead people. because we've all been raised that way. We were all raised on a diet of ghost stories and things of that nature, where they're the spirits of the dead. But I can think of at least one compelling case where it appeared that the individual was communicating with some intelligence in the future. Which, how crazy is that? I can think of a couple of cases in which investigators have communicated with what appeared to be people in the past. So I think it's one big weird phenomenon that's multifaceted, and we need to keep very open minds, even as we introduce our hypotheses.
Well, I love that you brought up the time aspect because I really believe that all these things are linked together. It's just a function of how time works and how the electromagnetic field is connected together. I just had on Angela Ford, who is one of the top remote viewers from the Stargate program. And she said that how she was so successful at doing her readings. She actually was found the Lebanese hostages and won all these awards for being able to, use her psychic ability to find people. And she said she did it through channeling. So which is exactly what you're talking about, was seeking out some sort of entity that was able to communicate what's going to happen. So that opens us up to a whole nother field of thinking. That's why I like that you say these aren't necessarily ghosts of dead people, because they could be interdimensional or we don't know. Where are these things, but they're somehow living on this one spectrum of reality that we don't have a firm hold of. So what do you think? What percentage would you say? Or just give me your thoughts on this of when you think that it is an actual true. This was somebody that passed and is there, like in the example of those wars were going on, or an instance where you go, okay, this seems more like maybe this was another being, right? So from all your investigations, I mean, what do you notice?
I think that firstly, 90% of those investigations have found a non-paranormal explanation, and it really sucks emotionally because we're all so invested in ghost stories. But 90% of them, if you look diligently enough and if you factor in enough of the mundane factors, you can often find a perfectly rational explanation. Of that remaining 10%, I would say maybe about half of them are residual and then half of them are intelligent, And it's tough to determine in the case of those intelligent ones who or what you're dealing with. One thing that fascinates me, for example, is one of my favorite haunted locations is a place called Malvern Manor in Iowa. I wrote a book on that. And as part of the research, I got involved with one of the personalities there, also one of the entities is said to be that of a woman named Gracie. Now, Gracie had what used to be called split personality disorder, now it's DID. But multiple personalities were documented by the nursing staff there when this nursing home was open. She would speak in the voice of a child, of an adult, male or female, and all kinds of different personalities would come forth out of this one woman. Now, what's fascinating is twofold to me. Number one, Gracie's room, which was left pretty much as it was when she lived there. Even her spectacles are still in that room. Investigators have had experiences with multiple personalities in that room, as if they're still interacting with these multiple shards of Gracie's fractured personality. That's cool, right? But even stranger is this. She never died there. She never died in that building, let alone that room. She occupied it for an extended period of time. And when they closed the facility down, they shipped her out. So did some fragment of those personalities remain behind? What exactly is it we're communicating with? Dead people just doesn't work in that particular case. We need a more complex, a more fulfilling answer. And, I think also while we're on the subject, it's worth talking about UFO, UAP phenomena, because I think, again, we are brought up to just equate them with, flying saucers, little green men, extraterrestrials, things of that nature. But as we know, it's stranger than that, right? There are some hypotheses that they may be time travelers, that they may be a type of drone that is projected or introduced here interdimensionally or transdimensionally. There are all kinds of hypotheses for what UFO, UAP may be. So I like the fact that we as enthusiasts and investigators are getting away from the lazy UFOs equals aliens, ghosts equals the dead. We shouldn't default to that. It may be correct in certain cases, but we have to keep an open mind.
And to you, what does that open mind mean? I mean, let's go down the rabbit hole of the different possibilities, that this could actually be, from from everything that you've researched.
So I think we just listed off a few of them in the last 10 minutes, right? We talked about the possibility of time travel. We talked about the possibility of dimensional travel, things of that nature. We talked about the possibility that we are just dealing with spirits of the dead or the subconscious of the individual, which is a fairly common explanation for how the Ouija board works, the ideomotor effect coupled with the subconscious of one of the people working the planchette. However, there are test measures you can introduce when using a Ouija board in which you can rule out the possibility that it is the subconscious of one of the sitters. One thing I always do when I use a board, for example, is once the board starts actually working and the planchette moves, I will have somebody that is not on the board write a number between 1 and 1,000 on a piece of paper and take it into an adjoining room and let nobody, including me, see that number. Leave it face up and then ask the board to give us that number. Now there's a 1 in 1,000% chance you will get it right. There is a 999 1,000% chance you won't if you're purely guessing. So on those occasions when the number comes up correct, it's very likely you're dealing with something paranormal. Whether it's telepathy, whether it's an entity that operates independently, is something you have to delve into a little bit. But yeah.
So then you have looked into this, I mean, this is a sort of, channeling, you can call it, but using the Ouija board. So when did you start exploring that? Is that something that you just always did, or you said, hey, let me give this a shot and see if I can actually summon an entity of some sort? Because that's like a kid's game,
We actually went further than that. We tried to create one, which we did with some degree of success, again, at Malvern Manor in Iowa. I always found Ouija boards to be fascinating, but, there is a perfectly good, again, non-paranormal explanation for them a lot of the time. The idea that it is just the subconscious of somebody that's got a finger resting on that planchette. So it's a tool that, in what other realm of life, where if you're using a tool and that there is a built-in design flaw, why would you not try and stamp that flaw out? Why would you not try and mitigate it? So fairly quickly after I began using the board, I began introducing these control measures. And sometimes I would find that, the board would not give us the accurate number, in which case, why would you trust that what's coming through really is a communication from a discarnate intelligence? If it can see you, if it can see the board, if it can manipulate the board, shouldn't it be able to nip next door and see that number and come back and relay it? Shouldn't it be able to? And if not, why not? And why would I trust anything it says? So talking boards, I think, are a lot like the old internet chat rooms from the 90s, where you only had the word of the person on the other end that they were who they said they were.
That's interesting because I'm curious if you've ever looked into precognition at all. Have you?
I foresaw that you would ask that. No, I didn't. I couldn't help myself. Precognition fascinates me. It's not something I have a lot of experience with, and so I think the jury is out on it. But it is interesting. I just finished with co-author Tobias Whalen the book about Mothman, and one of the things that fascinated me was that prior to the Silver Bridge collapse, which killed 47 people, a number of residents of Point Pleasant, the town, the center of this Mothman kind of incident, a number of them had dreams of Christmas presents floating down the river. And of course, when the bridge collapsed, it was loaded with cars that were people going Christmas shopping. It happened just a couple of weeks before Christmas. And a number of those Christmas presents, did inevitably get dumped into the water. So that seems like a pretty clear case of precognition, if you ask me.
Yeah, and all these things kind of tie together because when you're talking about using the Ouija board and going, oh well, why can't it? If it could tell me, the number here, why can't it tell me what's next door? There are some people that would look at this and go, well, that's actually just your own consciousness, and because you instructed yourself, you were just using this as a tool to unlock your own consciousness to go and find that information.
Possibly,
so,
yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's
So
valid, but Michael, that's a valid interpretation. It would still be on the fringes of what we would call paranormal, and it's
exactly.
no less fascinating. And again, you're absolutely right. Whether I'm telepathically obtaining that information is no less interesting to me than whether a dead or a disembodied entity tells me that info. I'm still
Right.
obtaining it through means that are highly, well, they're unique.
Yeah. Because yeah, I've been to lots of haunted places,
Mm.
and they never want to show themselves to me. Damn it. So,
Always a
but some
bridesmaid, never a bride, right? The paranormal
exactly.
investigator's curse. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but I've heard plenty of the stories. Like I said, it was 10 years in the Comedy Store.
Hmm.
There's lots of stories there. So it seems to be only certain people. Have
Hmm.
you noticed that too? That is a certain type of personality or a certain type of person that's open to maybe these entities feel like they can communicate to them, or it's a welcoming situation. Have you looked into the type of person that is having these experiences?
I am very cautious because, and I'll just say it as I see it, but there are people out there that are, there's no nice way to put it, really delusional. And I always get very suspicious when somebody wants the narrative to be all about them. When I'm investigating a haunting or a claim of something paranormal, the emphasis should be on the phenomena. It should be on the claims, and it should be on the location itself. That's the story that I'm usually trying to tell. When somebody is like, well, this only happens when I'm around, and they only show themselves to me and things of that nature, I find that more often than not, the reason for that is that somebody has motives um, which are not usually the purest. You know what I mean? I'm not saying they necessarily set out to defraud. I'm saying that they want to be special. There is an inherent desire to be special, and they will kind of warp that narrative in order to put themselves at the heart of it. That being said, I do think keeping an open mind to the possibility of these kind of phenomena stands people in good stead as well. If you are completely skeptical, completely closed off, and in fact, while we're talking about this, I think skeptics get a bad rap because the word skeptic is misused and misunderstood. And I actually think the X Files is probably to blame for this, because where else can one individual see an invasion fleet of alien sources landing and still try and debunk it? Right? It's crazy. But denial is very different. That we're talking about skepticism saying, these are some pretty out there claims. So what's the evidence for them? And then weigh that evidence. Sometimes the paranormal explanation, as outlandish as it seems, is still the most reasonable one when you factor in all the evidence and weigh it up.
And it is like speaking of the UFO stories. I remember
Mm,
about 6 7 months ago, or maybe it was about a year ago now, when the somebody called in a alien sighting in their backyard, said they were
yeah,
8 feet tall, and then all of a sudden you get these a spur of more people reporting, and it's almost like people just want to be in that spotlight
yeah.
just because it's an attention grabbing thing. So it does diminish the credibility of everything of it in general.
And I do really appreciate those cases in which I'm brought in, and a witness will say, can you not use my name, or could you give me a pseudonym? I don't want any publicity. That speaks to their credibility. If they're actually, actively shunning publicity, I find that really helps the credibility of that case.
Well, let's talk about some of these more interesting cases that you've been involved with. Some of them that you wrote about in Dark Spirits. I mean, great.
Mhm.
I love Dark Spirits because there's a lot of stories that you've been involved with, and then there's some older stories that you bring into. So, how would you
Mhm.
kind of summarize what Dark Spirits is about?
It is the book I wanted to find under my Christmas tree when I was 8 years old. I grew up on these terrific ghost paranormal books where they would be, vignettes. They would cover some bigger phenomenon that I would then go and seek out a more comprehensive book about. So, whether it's like a cryptids and the Loch Ness monster, which is in this book, or whether we're talking about, alleged demonic possession, whether we're talking about the classic haunted house, or the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, one of the most fascinating UFO abduction cases. I wanted to give enough of a rundown of some of these places and phenomena that will satisfy the reader to the point where they then go and seek out the broader story.
Yeah, and it is there. I mean, there are so many bizarre stories there that you just want to kind of go down the if you want to find out more about them. Like the one that kind of pulled out to me, and I like this. Now I have to go visit the next time I'm in Denver. Is the can you tell us about that? There was a burial ground that they built like a garden on top of
The
Denver
Botanic Gardens,
Botanical
yeah.
Garden. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved the movie Poltergeist, the Spielberg, the original. I think it's one of the great ghost stories
Oh
of
yeah.
the cinematic age. It's so well done. And probably, there are a number of iconic scenes in it, right? Carol Ann in front of the TV and things of that nature. But for me, the scene I love the most is where the coffins are coming up out of the ground and skeletons are falling everywhere. The house is being sucked into the void. Steve Freeling has just learned that his house is built on a native burial ground, and his boss turns up because he's been off work forever, dealing with this haunting and its effects on his family, and all hell is literally breaking loose. And Craig T. Nelson playing Steve Freeling, he kind of grabs him by the collar and goes, "You son of a bitch! You moved the headstones, you left the bodies," right? Which is literally what they did at the Denver Botanic Gardens. It was Denver's original park back in the day. Original cemetery back in the day. My bad. And so it got pretty full pretty quick. And then the powers that be decided that as Denver grew and we started to see some urban sprawl, maybe a cemetery in the heart of the city wasn't the best move. Maybe a park would be better. So what they did was they hired a contractor to move the bodies to a new cemetery, to a cemetery further away from the city. Well, this contractor was not the most ethical. There was a scandal because he was caught like stuffing 3 sets of remains into one coffin in order to save money on coffins for himself, and keep more profit. There were stories of people's relatives, their caskets being opened and them left open under the sun while the crews were working to move them and things of that nature. Seemed to have been done without any dignity or tact. And it became a scandal in the newspapers. So finally they said enough is
What time
enough.
period are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking about early 1900s.
Okay.
So the powers that be decided, enough is enough. And they said, look, we're giving everybody basically a month to come and move their loved ones or pay for it to be done. And at that point, we're just getting rid of the headstones and we're going to put grass all over. And we are going to turn this into a city park, Cheesman Park, as it now is. And that's exactly what they did. So it's estimated that anywhere between 2,000 and 4,000 sets of human remains are still under there. And they built the Botanic Gardens on top in addition to the park. Now, in order to maintain a Botanic Gardens, you've got to water pretty aggressively, right? That's part of the deal. And as that's been done over the years, the water seeps down. You have all these coffins under there. The wood rots at an accelerated rate because of the water seepage. These air pockets start collapsing, and now you have subsidence going on. So the Denver Botanic Gardens is kind of slowly collapsing into the ground. And the people that work in the manor house, which is at the heart of the gardens, many of them have ghost stories. They've heard their names called when the building was empty. They've heard footsteps, voices, knockings, all the classic haunting stuff. And when I was invited to go spend a few nights there, they just lost the security guard. He quit in the middle of the night and wouldn't come back. Like, wouldn't say why. He just I quit, peace out, I'm done. So, yeah. So, when you look at the reasons behind a traditional haunting, there's the classic unfinished business and things of that nature. But there's also the whole thing about defilement or desecration of a burial ground, and I think the saddest thing about that situation is not just that they built on top of this burial ground, but the names of those individuals are now forgotten. They're lost to history. There is no stone where anybody can go visit them and remember that they existed. And if that were me, I would be pretty angry about it.
That is one of the wildest stories to think that that's, I mean, right here in the U.S., in one of our
Mm-hmm.
biggest cities in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pretty recent. This is within the 100 years, right?
Just over, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is, so it's kind of wild that they don't at least, have some sort of commemorative something there, they like, to all these, people that were buried there. And when you were there, you actually had your own encounter, didn't you?
More than one. Yeah. I did write a book on it called The Dead Below. And so what is in Dark Spirits is just a kind of a subset, a taster of what I encountered. But we had several things occur when we were in the Botanic Gardens. The one that I'll never forget is that the security guard, a new security guard who'd barely been there a week, came to meet me and my team. And she met us at the gate and she said, "Oh, you guys are the ghost hunters. It's so good to meet you. I love this paranormal stuff. If you get any hauntings, you call me. Here's my number. I'll be on duty all night. I switched out all the lights for you. So let me go let you in." And as she's talking to us, she's leading us along this path towards the manor house. And we turn the corner and every light is blazing in the house that she has just switched them all off and has locked up. And her demeanor changed. And she went from, "You call me," to like, "Don't call me. I don't want to know." She had that got more than I bargained for moment, like right in front of my eyes. It was so funny, but I felt for her at the same time. Because, it's easy to be interested in this in the comfort of your living room at the middle of the afternoon, right? But when it's your job to go patrol a haunted manor house on top of a burial ground, suddenly maybe you don't want to know as much about the paranormal as you think you do. So she went back to the security center and did not want to know the rest of the night.
Yeah. I'm on her team. All right. You can write about. I'll read your story after you write about them. Okay, but I don't want to experience. Maybe that's why I haven't seen them. But that makes me think of this because I have heard of this before. I'm curious if you've experienced it or you've heard of this. Is when a lot of times when somebody else comes in, you bring a guest in or you visit a place you're encountering, you'll find that now you go home and you're having some of these experiences, some of these hallucinations or visions in your place. I don't know if you've ever read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. They talk about a lot of the workers that went home from Skinwalker Ranch, the investigators, now they were getting these experiences, hauntings in their own home. Have you experienced this, or did you hear about this, or?
I did. So, yeah, I have read that book. And Lou Elizondo said as much as well in his memoir, which came out this year. His work with UAP and things like that. He was getting glowing balls of light would turn up in his home that he and his family would see. So, which again takes it beyond just ghosts, and puts you into the realm of UFO, UAP. For me, the only strange thing I had at home was a few years back, I seemed to bring something back with me from an investigation. I don't know the location. It was a year where I've been to several places of note, like Waverly Hills Sanatorium and Asylum 49 and places like that. So could have been anywhere, but we began to see a shadow figure in the house. My dog began to bark at thin air, which she wasn't prone to doing before then. My wife heard a woman's voice in the house calling out hello, and then the straw that broke the camel's back was a bunch of picture frames just seemed to leap down from the mantelpiece and nearly landed on my cat, which enough's enough then. You want to try and spook me, that's fine, but you come near my animals and we're going to fall out. So I'm an agnostic, but I called my friend Stephen, who is a priest, was a Catholic priest, and he came over and did a 2-hour blessing on the home. And you really haven't had to eat humble pie until, as an agnostic, you ask a priest to come help you out. And he came over with a twinkle in his eye, and I said, Stephen, I don't believe in the same things you do. I don't believe in the same God you do. And he said, that's okay. He believes in you, which I thought was very well put. And he went from room to room. He would take holy water. He would daub the sign of a cross on each door frame, performed his ritual, his ceremony. And then 2 hours later, everything cleared up. Like we never had anything happen in the house again. So it fascinated me because it worked. It absolutely worked. And to this day, I don't have a plausible explanation for it.
I mean, both sides of that story are equally kind of crazy to me. So first, it means wild. So you were experiencing stuff, these situations happening in your own home. Your wife is seeing it too. It must have been terrifying. Or were you not really scared because you didn't really think this was something to fear?
Well, my wife it comes with the territory of living with someone who investigates and writes about the paranormal, that she's pretty au fait with this side of things. But what she's not happy with, understandably, is it happening within our own four walls. That never has the phrase "don't bring work home with you" been truer than in this line. So I think it was more the fact that it was happening, in what should have been our personal space that she had an issue with.
And then also with just that, I mean, you had essentially like a priest come through, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, right, doing an exorcism almost.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one where you go, you look back, and this is for all human history. They have had some sort of priests, even in the native tribes, that are doing something to make demonic entities go away. And look, even this actually worked. So who knows why it works? It could just be some sort of ritual. We don't know how these things work. I think it's still, all of these things are linked to how consciousness actually exists through some sort of electromagnetic field. But it's very interesting because
Well, I mean, my profession is medicine, so, and my degree is medicine. So, I tend to look at things in that kind of through that lens, and really, there is a parallel with placebo because we don't know how placebo works, but it works. It's undeniable. There is an avalanche of data which supports, the fact that placebo works. So, as an agnostic, I found it very interesting because. If I'd been a Christian or of any other faith whatsoever, and a person of that denomination came in, then it would very clearly be a case of, directed belief that was in accordance with my belief system. This wasn't in accordance with my belief system. So it puts it kind of a step beyond placebo, but it still worked, So I was a little self-conscious about it, but I make a point of telling everybody, that this is a thing. Because the result, you can't argue with the results. And yeah, I don't know. I've always thought that prayer is essentially directed intent and belief, and belief is powerful. I mean, the flip side of it, and it's something that I did write about in Dark Spirits, is curses, and do curses work on people if they don't know that they've been cursed? And if they don't believe that curses have power over them? Do they only have the power that we give them? Or is there actually some extrinsic objective process at work?
They do say that, the thing is, when you curse somebody, like if you look at those, the Rastafarian religion, where they would cut a chicken's head and throw it at your door. And so they see the blood. You wake up to a dead chicken on your door, and this still goes on in Miami right now. That's why if you ever visit down south Miami, you hear roosters and chickens. That's because they use them for their religion. And so they'll cut a chicken's head, throw it at your door. You wake up, you see, oh no, I've been cursed. And just the act of you saying you've been cursed, you start to act in a manner to manifest all these terrible things. So this is, just in line with exactly what you're saying. Is it, if you don't know you've been cursed, are you cursed?
And in the case of once the dead chicken has been splattered at your door, do you begin to experience poltergeist phenomena?
Okay, you did it. That
I'm
wasn't
not
me,
letting that one
guys.
pass.
That
No,
wasn't
that was
me, I
me.
guess.
But in all seriousness, belief is a powerful thing. I mean, how many times have you seen this happen where you go to work or you go to school or wherever you go, and somebody says, "Hey, Michael, you feeling okay, man? You look kind of rough." Yeah, I'm fine. You doing okay, dude? You don't look great. Well, I didn't sleep great. And then the fourth person tells you this, and all of a sudden you feel not great. Now suggestion is so powerful. Belief is so powerful. And I think it is one of those great forces at work in so many of these paranormal cases, the power of belief and suggestion.
Yeah, it is, and there's too many instances to kind of dissuade it all. But one of the things that you wrote about there, in the same realm of these exorcisms, is you wrote about a case of this woman who they did do a movie about her a few years ago, where she wasn't
Mm-hmm.
eating, and her parents were very religious, and
Mm-hmm.
actually she ended up dying. But I mean,
Yeah.
the parents went to jail, right? Because
Yeah.
who knows if it was true or not? Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So essentially, it's one of the great exorcism tragedies. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight a little bit was exorcisms are not necessarily benign. People die while being exorcised, especially when an exorcism can take weeks, if not months, in certain cases. So this was a particular case out of Europe. where this poor lady was very devout. She began to show signs and behavior of what she and her family and their priests believed was demonic possession. And so, part of that process, in addition to being prayed over and having the priest try and expel whatever the entity was, she was not taking in food. She was physically restrained. She was starving. Annalise Michel was the lady's name. And ultimately, her death was ruled a product partially of malnourishment. Like the woman was skeletal when she died. She was a shadow of her former self. So, in that particular case, it's exorcism as physical abuse, and this was acknowledged in the court when the case went to trial. And backstreet exorcisms, as they call them, still happen today throughout the Western world. They happen in the UK, they happen in the United States, North America, anywhere. Depending upon your faith, there are still people conducting exorcisms which have potentially dangerous side effects.
And this is a case of the parents believing so much, wanting to believe that this was a demon, and actually taking it to the point where maybe, they could have got their child some actual real help, and it could have changed things. So,
yeah, and there's the tragedy, right? These parents did not set out to harm their kid. They wanted their kid to be okay. They wanted her to have a normal life. They wanted the best for her, and in doing so, they had an active hand in killing her. It's awful, absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, that's no, I didn't see the movie, but you wrote about it there, and I couldn't believe it. But your book is filled with so many of the stories just like that. I love that you threw in the Betty and Barney Hill one. Let me ask you this as we start to wrap up over here. I want to ask your take on what's going on here with the UAP UFO situation, because I know that you do investigate this as well. What do you make of these things that are happening right now, with it being so public? What's your take? Do you think that the government is purposely trying to manipulate us with this, or are we just truly having more of these sightings now?
I've got absolutely the smartest answer on this, which is I don't know, but I do have some thoughts. So I've heard them dismissed as just being commercial drones or drones of some description. Numerous eyewitness reports state that they are as big as a car and they are hovering. That is not the kind of thing a private citizen can possibly get their hands on, that level of technology. Then you run into the fact that they are seen in and around airspace surrounding military centers. And then you add the fact that this is happening in multiple countries, not just the US. Talking to my friends and contacts in my native UK, British air bases have had drone sightings as well. They've also been happening in India and other locations. So it's a global phenomenon rather than anything. What worries me most or concerns me the most is the US government, essentially has just dismissed them out of hand, or at least publicly they have. When something is invading your airspace, especially your military airspace, the military exists to shoot that kind of stuff down. So why haven't they? Have they tried? They seem so casual and blasé about it. Just that alone looks suspicious to me.
Yeah, it's very suspicious, and I'm hoping that we get disclosure soon, and I think maybe we're gonna something's gonna happen one way or the other, because even in just in my lifetime, it feels like this is every day you're seeing more and more of the UFO sightings.
Well, and have you noticed that, people like us that would have been considered fringe in the past would have been considered, to use an unpleasant but commonly used word, nut. They would say, oh, he's a UFO nut. He's one of those people. Now it's water cooler conversation. Like, people are so open to the possibility that this is actually an alien phenomenon, and there is not panic in the streets. People are totally on board with it. In fact, I think a lot of people just have the mindset of, I should have had that on my bingo card for 2025. Alien life reveals itself at last, because the world is getting increasingly strange, isn't it? So, but yeah, this level of acceptance, it started building in the 50s. And we saw it, with the kind of hysteria of movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still. That's where we began. Then you get Spielberg giving us Close Encounters and E.T., kind of paving the way for friendlier, more collaborative, cooperative extraterrestrial life. And there are those people that think that the media has had a role in preparing humanity for decades, just gradually warming the water, rather than dropping us in boiling water straight away, just gradually kind of bringing that temperature up and acclimating us to the idea that we're not alone and we're about to possibly meet them officially.
It does definitely appear that they're trying to prepare us, and there's all a collusion to get the soften the blow as it comes. What percentage do you give that these are actually just government technology, and they're almost masking our technology in the fact that they're saying that these are UAPs, but this is really Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and they've got some advanced technology they don't want anyone to know about.
Why are you flying them over urban centers and military bases? Why are you flying them? Why do that? If the whole point is stealth, you don't fly them over downtown Pittsburgh or wherever. You just don't. So it doesn't quite fit as far as I'm concerned. Like if it's a stealth program, you expect to see stealthy behavior. Some of these things are lit up like Christmas trees.
That's true. You know what? I really enjoyed talking to you today. You're a wealth of paranormal information, and I hope everyone goes out there, read your book. Is there anywhere you want to send people? At Twitter, Instagram, your website? Where would you like to send people to get more information on you?
Sure. Come see me at richardestep.net. You can find information on all of my books right there. Shoot me an email if you are so inclined.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, Richard. This was fantastic having you on. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. It was a pleasure.